can an Easter hymn veil the scrape of steel in a darkened room? Can daylight, braided with bells and lilies, hide the old arithmetic of pain that tallies itself by night? And can silence carried like a stone beneath the tongue become a blade that sings? Tennessee, 1845. The hills moved in slow blue breaths, and the big house sat like a sermon no one dared interrupt. The fields of parchment of green and gold whispered when the wind turned, and the quarters creaked with the logic of long seasons. In that hush where obedience pretends to be peace, a different gospel ripened, unspoken, unwritten, but older than law. On the morning of resurrection, with lace on tables, starch on collars, and breath held over bread, something else rose, not grace, not mercy, something that had waited, measured, counted, and would no longer be postponed. Pause here. If you want to follow real stories that defy time and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our investigations. So we proceed carefully, with the patience of winter trees and the memory of iron. The house had a grammar, doors that spoke in vowels of oak, windows that conjugated light into squares upon the floor, and stair treads that remembered each foot by name. Morning arrived with a pale, forgiving face, washing banisters and portraits with milk-glass brightness. Copper pots breathed softly in the kitchen like old animals sleeping. The hearthstones held the ash-ridden diary of 100 small fires. In the pantries, glass jars stood at attention, capturing peaches from summers that felt like other lifetimes. On the porch, a cane-bottomed chair sighed each time the master sat, as if it wished to be elsewhere. His boots, barked to a black that swallowed the light, travelled the boards with a beat that tuned every room to the same key, caution. He had a way of smiling that crowded the air, a way of speaking that made the simplest words wear iron shoes. His leather gloves lived on a nail by the door, dumb beasts that remembered the shape of his hands too well. The fields spread out like a hymn that had forgotten its mercy. Rows of tobacco and corn practiced obedience in neat lines, heads bowed toward a soil acquainted with sweat, milk, and blood. The quarters kept their own weather, a hush that clung to rafters like the smell of damp wood, a quiet industry that stitched time together so it would not fall apart. Dawn shook them gently, a spoon against a tin, a pot lid lifted and set down again, and bodies moved through the blue hour with the humility of shadows. There was the bell at the big house, polite silver trained to say now, and there was the bell at the smokehouse, blunter, practical, saying come. The smokehouse itself exhaled the slow breath of salted meat, hooks catching light like thin ice. In the wash-yard a rope hummed with the weight of shirts, aprons, and handkerchiefs, small white chapels that lifted their hems to the wind. A broom leaned against the stoop, its straw frayed like a whisper at the end of a prayer. Sundays had a different shine, shirts stiffened, aprons whitened, floors were persuaded to reflect faces. The master's wife, a quiet tyranny wrapped in lace, counted silver with the loyalty of a clock. The tablecloth fell in clean snow, a script of folds and corners that said the world had order and knew how to keep it. Eager made everything more exact. Lilies announced a purity no one believed. Eggs wore dyes brighter than truth. The parlour piano, its voice like sugar held in the mouth, tested the morning with hymns that tasted of forgiveness. But the walls remembered something else. In the small garden beyond the kitchen, mint lifted its green wrists. Rosemary kept her needles close. A black-handled knife rusted slightly in a clay pot, its throat orange and patient. Chickens negotiated the earth with soft, busy feet. A silver-grey cat threaded itself through chair legs and table legs with the arrogance of survival. The pump at the well groaned 1, 2, 3, and water rose from the stone like the past itself, cold, clear, undeniable. Nathan moved through this grammar the way a careful reader approaches a dangerous text. He was not tall, not short, but precisely the size of the work asked of him. Muscles wrote themselves into his shoulders without boasting. Hands learned the biography of tools. He drank morning with the plain face of a man who has seen the back of every season. His silence had edges. When spoken to, he gave back what was required, nothing ornate. In the kitchen smoke, his eyes kept their own weather, a grey that knew distances and the cost of crossing them. He learned the house by heart, which step on the back stair accepted a foot without complaint, which window latch stuck in humidity, how the master's study breathed at night, paper and whiskey and the dry animal smell of leather. He learned the times when the key was careless and the times when it slept beneath a ledger. He learned that even doors have moods. He learned where spoons congregated, their heads reflecting a world always upside down. The quarters kept stories under the tongue, little ones gathered like birds around old knees. The old ones kept their eyes on the threshold, as if memory might walk in and sit. Women sewed with a patience that outlived the thread. Men mended handles with new hickory, proving that even broken things could be re-argued with use. The night before Easter, someone hummed a tune that began on the ground and rose no higher than a man's chest. It stopped whenever boots approached. If you read the day with care, there were notes tucked into its hem, a stain on the table runner that refused to let go, a crack in the master's cup that widened when hot coffee met it, a waver in a hymn as though a string had frayed in the throat of the morning. The house, practised in looking away, went on looking away, but the floorboards knew, but the stairs knew, but the knife in the clay pot knew. The air itself learned to hold its breath. I learned the distances by walking them, the yard between smokehouse and main steps, 42 strides when I am empty, 45 when tired. The hall from pantry to study, 14 boards, the third from last with a splinter that will teach any man to lift his heel. The back stair, 11 rises, the 9th one honest only if your weight confesses slow. In this country they say a man like me should remember only what is told to him. Instead I kept a ledger the way a banker does, entries in bone and breath, proof in scar and silence. First entry. The winter my sister coughed up strings of red in the night, and the mistress said, "No doctor for the likes." The frost had unthreaded itself across the window like lace. I pressed my palm to the glass and learned how cold can be a kind of church. We buried her in land that grew people like weevils, small and many and easily crushed. The hymn they allowed had too many white words in it to make sense of her. Second entry. A boy not yet man caught with a book. The master smiled with only one half of his mouth. "Words will spoil him," he said. "Best to salt the animal before it rots." The whip wrote on that boy's back with a handwriting the rain could not wash. After 3 days he could no longer remember what the letters were trying to tell him, only that they had the shape of something better. Third entry. The day the master's glove found my face because the coffee had cooled. It was July, the air had been boiled until it forgot how to breathe. He said my name the way a man names a mule, short with a string at the end. I tasted iron. I told the blood to stay inside. It did not listen. The next morning he did not remember. I did. There were smaller entries, coins of pain, a plate snatched from my hand so hard the lip cut my thumb. A laugh in the parlour when the preacher joked about obedience, the way the field overseer would hold a word for so long between his teeth that by the time he let it go, it came out wearing fangs. I recorded them all. Men like me count by silence kept and breath survived. In the quarters, the old woman we call Aunt Ruth looked at me over her thread. "Don't spend your life on the first price that's offered," she said. "Let the market of time do its work." I understood. Patience is not softness. It is a blade wrapped in cloth. It is hunger learning to sit straight at the table and wait. At night I listened to the house. The master's cough had a rhythm, 3 short, 1 long, like a bad prayer. The floor beneath his study wore a hollow where his chair punished it. When he drank, the glass and the desk held a conversation. When he wrote letters, the nib found a small stutter on the paper and worried it like a tooth. I mapped it all, a cartography of power and its laziness. Easter drew near with a smile too bright for the road it travelled. The mistress spoke of angels who rolled stones away. I thought of stones that never moved, only learned the shape of the bodies beneath them. The cook pressed sweet rolls into pans, cinnamon arguing with butter that it was the true language of comfort. In the shed, the whetstone waited, oval as an old truth. Someone had sharpened the kitchen knife last month. It remembered how to listen. I was never hungry for blood. I was hungry for the ledger to balance. In a world that taught me numbers by the pound and the lash, I wanted at least one column to close. The night before Easter, the moon behaved itself, wearing the plain linen it saves for serious work. I tried sleep and it refused me. On the back of my eyelids, names wrote themselves without hands. My sister, the boy, my mother's palms, cracked into maps, no one read. My own face, careful as a locked drawer. A man needs more than anger. Anger burns the room and leaves you with ashes. What I needed was measure, and time gave me that like a miser. Small, exact, mean, but enough to shop with. I counted the bells, breakfast, noon, supper, prayer. I learned the Mass's thirst. I learned the hour when lace grows careless because it is sure of itself. I learned that in the moment a hymn grows loudest. On the morning I dressed like any other servant of a house that wants its own reflection. Shirt clean, hands dry, eyes grey as dishwater. Under the shirt the ledger unwritten but heavy. Over the heart patience coiled as a rope. Begin with small obedience. Lay the cloth, polish the spoons, pretend the world is made of reflections. I started at dawn, when light lays its palm on everything and blesses it without asking permission. The parlour smelled of polish and uncertainty. I aligned the forks as if righteousness could be achieved by distance alone. The mistress approved what she thought she saw. On the sideboard I set down the knives with the humility of a man who understands edge and appetite. In the kitchen the knife slept in its block, blade cooling from yesterday's work. I slid it free the way a man draws a thought out of a crowd. The whetstone was where I had left it, half covered by a rolled cloth, oval and grey as winter fruit. Water, then stone. I let the steel kiss the grit in long, even passes. No haste, no flourish. The sound was rain on a distant roof. The edge sharpened not by force but by courtesy. The angle kept honest. I turned the blade and gave the other side the same patience. Edge is a conversation. Rush it and it lies. The cook clucked her tongue at the noise. I apologized with a nod, as if the sharpening were for her benefit, for the roast, for the celebration of a tomb unwalled. I wiped the blade and set it among its siblings. Families are often made this way. Resemblance at rest, difference when called. Next, the house. A blade is only as faithful as the door that lets it into a room. I walked the back stair in daylight, one step at a time, heel soft, toes softer. The ninth riser confessed its complaint. I folded a scrap of cloth and fed it to the gap, then tested. The stair learned to keep a secret. The corridor to the study wore a runner long as a promise. Under its corner, a wedge of wood lost its fight to hold. I pressed it home until it believed again. The window latch in the study was sulky in damp weather. I cleaned it and left it confident. Confidence makes men careless. Carelessness is a key. I arranged the room the way he preferred it for prayer after supper, the desk squared to the carpet, the decanter obedient to the right hand, the Bible placed sternly beneath the lamp. I dusted the spine, left the page marker in Matthew where he had been teaching mercy to other men. The chair complained, as it always did, low, wooden, grief. I rubbed a little tallow into the joints, and the grief quieted. A quiet chair, at the right time, can be a choir. Time is a tool. I kept it oiled. From the smokehouse I carried strips of meat, from the garden rosemary and mint, so Easter would taste pious. I coiled twine in my pocket, the same twine that keeps parcels obedient, that stops lids from wandering, that teaches sacks to mind their mouths. To others it was only twine. To me it was a line, measure this, bind that, count the length between one breath and the next. I visited the well and pumped water until it ran clear. The handle moaned less, pleased at being remembered. I let the cat wind around my ankles, a soft grey question mark. In its purr there was a lesson. Even small throats know how to sing when they are sure of their claws. I placed the napkins, folded lilies, the mistress's favourite trick, and in one I hid a thin sliver of lard along the fold. Not to poison, to grease a future hinge. The hinge of a window, the hinge of a door, when soundlessness would be the only language left. I walked the hallway between kitchen and study until it forgot I was there. In the quarters, Aunt Ruth's hands made a tide over her lap. "Ledger men live long," she said, as if she were only greeting the weather. I asked for a blessing with my eyes, and she gave me one with her silence. A woman who has outlived more than seasons knows which words to keep. The church bell tested itself at noon, silver, then brass, then iron. The master met the day in a coat that deceived itself about his soul. He liked to be admired by his reflection. He liked to talk about resurrection when all his days were organized to prevent it. He patted my shoulder in front of the guests. A show of gentleness is the cheapest part of cruelty. Inside my pocket, the twine warmed to my hand. I rehearsed the path. Pantry, corridor, study. Knife, cloth, latch. Breath in 4 counts. Fill, hold, spend, leave a little. The body must learn its cues until it refuses to forget. I studied the locks, not to break them, but to understand their pride. Pride makes metal slow. Slow metal makes soft men. Supper promised itself loudly. The piano bragged. The candles tried to outshine one another. The table wore its linen like authority. Laughter hustled from the parlour to the dining room and back. The master's appetite arrived before he did. The room tilted to make space for it. I served as a man does when the room considers him furniture. Plates travelled, knives negotiated, the roast conceded. In the scrape of forks, I heard the future sliding toward the present with careful feet. The plan was no trick. I do not trust tricks. The plan was a road I had laid, one cobble at a time. A sharp blade, a quiet stair, a compliant latch, a room made to forget it had a door. I waited for the hour between him and whiskey, the very seam of evening when a man chooses which god to believe. Night dilated until it could hold everything. The last plate sang against the last plate and came to rest. The mistress took her sky of lace to bed. The guests floated up the staircase like pale moths seeking a cooler flame. The house learned its soft breathing. I collected the glasses in my hands, crystal chiming in a small domestic study. I let the door close behind me in the pantry and stood in the grammar of jars and shadow. A clock far away remembered to count. I unrolled the cloth that had been waiting since morning. The thin seam of lard whispered against the hinge of the small back window, and the latch thanked me by forgetting to speak. The knife came to my hand without theatre. Steel has no conscience, it only keeps the promises you file into it. I crossed the corridor the way dew crosses grass, present but unwilling to be announced. The runner held my steps like a secret. At the study door I listened, paper, glass, breath. He turned a page. He turned another man's words into knives that only cut outward. The chair exhaled his weight. I opened the latch one patience at a time until it became the idea of a latch, nothing more. He looked up, as one does when the wind changes. He saw a man he owned carrying nothing but obedience. Obedience, I have learned, is indistinguishable from thunder until it strikes. "What do you want, Nathan?" he said, my name wearing its string. "To make the table right for morning," I answered, which was also true. I stepped inside. The door, polite now, met its frame with the gentleness of a hand closing over bread. He lowered his eyes to the page again. He liked to be watched by words while he drank. I crossed the carpet 12 blossoms on the border, each with 7 petals, each petal pointing toward the center. At the desk, the decanter judged the lamp. The lamp held its tongue. Steel measures distance better than rulers. My hand did not shake. Shaking is for those who have just met their decision. Mine and I were old friends. The edge found the brief stare between breath and speech. Time narrowed to the width of a vein drawn in ink. In the Bible, the crow of a rooster waited a page away. In the room, silence pressed its own feathered throat against the glass. I do not tell you this to glorify it. I tell you to show how a ledger closes. The blade, with the courtesy I had taught it, wrote a final line in the master's neck, where prayer and pride take their turns. He said no word I could print. The chair, newly humble, received him without complaint. His hand, that had so loved gloves, reached for air as if it had mislaid ownership. The decanter leaned, surprised by gravity. I put it right with a fingertip. The lamp flame steadied as if it wished not to be involved. Sound is a jealous witness. It hoards the small things, the soft patter of blood against the desk's underside, a rain that only one room understands, the whisper of his cuff slipping over bone, a sigh that could have been my own except I had none to spare. The house held itself still, the way a field does when a hawk makes a decision. I stood with the exactness of a man counting, 1 breath, 2. The blade, reverent now, accepted the cloth and lost its red. I set it down where knives sleep. On the Bible, mercy continued to argue. I let it. I opened the window 3 inches so the room could learn a cleaner story about itself. The night came into the study and nosed the pages like a curious animal. When he slid from the chair to the floor, the carpet found out what kind of witness it was. There is a colour that refuses to be forgotten. The lilies in the dining room would learn it by morning. I wiped the knob of the study door with a care even love rarely receives. I stepped back into the corridor where the runner forgave every foot. The back stair welcomed me, 9th riser faithful, the rest as modest as wood can be. In the pantry the jars kept their counsel. I washed my hands in a basin whose water never asked questions. Soap spoke briefly of fat and lie and then retired. I folded the cloth, placed it where it had slept. I breathed. I let the ledger turn its last page and close itself. Outside, the night had the simplicity of ink. Morning came in the exaggerated voice of Sundays. Bells thought themselves important again. The mistress arranged lilies until they believed her. Guests descended the staircase with mouths that smelled of forgiveness and dreams. The cook coaxed sweetness out of flour with the authority of a woman who knows what sugar can cover and what it cannot. When the master failed to present himself to admiration, the house attempted composure. A boy was sent to knock at the study. He returned carrying a silence much too heavy for his arms. The mistress went white like paper, thinking of fire. 2 men entered the room and met the new arithmetic. Rumour walked faster than any man's legs. By noon the yards of neighbouring farms had acquired the news the way grass acquires dew. Some said it was thieves. Some said it was the Lord, impatient with hypocrisy. One older neighbour said a man had come to collect the debt of a business done long ago. No one said the thing plainly that everyone's bones understood. This house had been weighed and measured. The sheriff wore the day like borrowed clothes. He held his hat in his hands and let the brim confess its nervousness. Questions were asked in the kitchen, on the porch, on the steps where sweet things cool. Boots thudded, voices pressed close to my face and then retreated as if heat had warned them. I answered as the truth permitted. I had sharpened the knife for roast. I had oiled a hinge. I had filled glasses. I had slept with the rest. Lies are best told in the shape of chores. In the quarters, an older man picked a splinter from a bench and shook his head at nothing. A woman lifted a child higher on her hip than necessary, as if to show the day its air. Aunt Ruth continued sewing the hem she had begun 2 evenings ago. She reached for thread with the serenity of a clock. When eyes met mine, they did not ask and they did not tell. A people who have taught silence to sing know the cost of applause. Newspapers stitched columns about it before the week had finished. Gentlemen found in study, foul play suspected. One paper dressed cruelty in lace and called it tragic. Another scolded the world for its lack of providence. None asked the Ledger what it thought. A travelling preacher did, from his pulpit at a revival tent 3 counties over, declared that Satan had been seen prowling in a dark house on a holy morning. "Be alert," he said, and counted the collection twice. Men in authority examined locks that had done their duty, windows that had minded their manners, floors that had kept secrets older than the county. They explained to one another that no common man could have entered without leaving a signature. They did not read the signature they stepped over with every question, the worn oval on the floor by the desk, the chair that refused to complain, the lamp wick trimmed to steadiness. A house tells the truth if you listen in its language. These men understood only their own. The master went into the ground with words stuffed all around him, verses and assurances, promises of a heaven that forgives certain sins more swiftly than others. The blackcoats stood like trees that had forgotten their leaves. I watched from a distance where grass remembers everything. The shovel's bright mouth took and took. The stone that would be placed later had already chosen its sentences. Names are the last chains, and granite loves a chain. Life returned as it always pretends to. The mistress counted silver in the afternoon light, her fingers having learned grief only as a new arithmetic. The guests went away, taking their theories with them, the way dogs carry bones. The sheriff returned once more, then not again. The cat resumed the haughty education of sparrows. A door somewhere fell back into its habits of complaining because I removed the cloth that had taught it manners. Inside me a quiet untied itself, stood and walked to the window of my chest. It looked out and saw the same world. It did not wave. Years later, because years do come, stubborn as weeds. Children in these hills were told not to linger near the old place after dusk. They said a man's breath could be heard through the keyhole, still deciding which god to believe. They said a chair in a certain room refused to be sat in, as if it had had its fill. They said the lilies withered too fast when brought into that house, unwilling to practice innocence beyond their hours. But the older mouths, the ones that have learnt the weight of words, told a thinner story. It was about a ledger, and how sometimes in the long account of a country, a single narrow line can balance a page. The story did not say whose hand held the pen. It did not say whether the ink was black or red. It said only that numbers have their own conscience, and that conscience keeps better time than bells. I kept living as men do who have work to finish. I buried my sister again in memory, this time with the portion of dignity I had scavenged. I spoke little. I let the seasons do their work over me. Summer's hard hand, winter's clean blade, spring's irresponsible hope, autumn's honest subtraction. In the quarters Aunt Ruth's thread came to an end. She bit it clean with teeth that had outlived a great many lies. She died one spring with her thimble in her hand, as if she had just finished mending the sky. Sometimes on a Sabbath afternoon I would walk to the edge of the field and put my palm on the fence rail. Wood remembers pressure. The rail would tell me, you have weight, you exist, you are not only what was done to you. The creek below the hill rehearsed its sentence without stutter, the same line it has been practicing since God invented stones. If I leaned close, I could hear it say, "Go on." People moved. Land changed coats. New paint tried to hide old sentences. Men planted where the study used to look down its nose. Women hung laundry where the pantry once counted jars against hunger. A child found a smooth oval of whetstone buried in the churned-up earth, held it to the sun, and put it in his pocket as if it were the moon. He would grow to be a man who could not say why the weight pleased him. Of the master there remained a stone that took the weather badly. Moss wrote its soft alphabet across his name. Winter taught the letters humility, summer asked them to sing, and they refused. A sparrow, democratic in its disregard, perched there sometimes and told a more accurate gospel than the preacher ever had. As for the room, some say at night if you open a certain window exactly 3 inches, the air will improve its manners. They say a lamp there does not smoke, though lamps elsewhere do. They say a man cleaning that desk once found a thin line of dark that no polish could persuade. Perhaps houses keep a kind of communion, passing bread of memory from floor to stair to latch, until even the nails know. The story travels. On some tongues it grows teeth and snarls, on others it wears a black ribbon and bows. In one county they make the killer a ghost, in another they call him a rumour. In none do they say his name as though they know him. That is as it should be. A ledger does not sign itself for the crowd. It closes with its back to the window, listening for the page that follows. When the bell rings on Easter's now, I do not cover my ears. I listen to hear whether the metal has learned anything. Sometimes the ring is thinner than it ought to be, as if light has been taken from it. Sometimes it is rich and round, as if forgiveness has weight after all. I let the sound pass through me and go on to its work in the hills. The cat that replaced the old grey one does not know me. That is mercy too. At night, when the house inside my chest quiets, I reach for the ledger I no longer need and find it gone. In its place, a small, plain thread. It is enough to sew a button back onto a good coat. It is enough to close a wound that has decided to heal in its own time. I keep it ready. If you must have an ending, take this. A room that breathes softly, a stair that keeps its counsel, a blade asleep in its drawer, a stone in a field remembering the warmth of a hand. Somewhere a window stands open exactly 3 inches. The night enters and reads the air like a book. Pages turn without hands, and under the vast grammar of the dark a ledger rests, unfinished but no longer owed.